So I wanted to ask another question. You talked about how you heard rumor about drug activity with playing Buffalo. Did you ever actually witness any of that yourself?
I did not.
Okay.
I only heard rumor of it that circulated kind of around the crew.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing confirmed or denied necessarily, but
Okay.
I did not ever personally witness it.
Okay, just curious. When was the last time you saw Ronie?
The last time I saw Ronie was about 2 months before she disappeared at a 4th of July party at a friend's house. It's typical socialization. We were all kind of out there, having beers, some fireworks in the streets, playing some music in the garage. Ronie was there. It was good to see her. I was really excited. I was pleased to see her because she seemed like she was doing well at that time. She seemed happy, and she seemed like she was eating properly. So she looked good at that time. And of course, those conditions could change pretty quickly, and it seems like they did, I guess. But she seemed pretty well at that time, and that was the last time I personally saw her. Though I, heard from a couple of her kids a little bit later than that, that like, oh yeah, she's, rooming with somebody. So I was like, oh good, she's got a place to live right now. That's definitely positive. Because Ronie went through some phases like that. Sometimes she was a bit transient. Sometimes she could be nailed down at an address.
Well, I know because we've spoke with where she was staying just like when she disappeared, and I don't even think in that situation, like you said, she was still pretty much transient because it wasn't really where she wanted to be. Because I don't know if you know where she was staying actually got busted while she was there.
I did not know that.
And so there was a lot of still upheaval, unfortunately for her. So you described Dave and Ronnie's relationship a little bit. Did you ever witness Jerry and Ronie together?
No, I knew that they were spending time together, that kind of the three of them had been spending time together. That was one of the things that Dave had confessed to me at the time, that he said, well, I gotta be honest with you, I have been smoking meth with Jerry and Ronie. Okay, so the three of you are spending time together right now.
Okay.
Probably not healthy because I knew, I kind of knew the dynamic, but they're grown adults. It's not my business to tell them what is or isn't good for them, other than to tell them that I'd like to see you be well. That's all. Whatever
So
that is for you.
you also talked about Dave's mental state, I guess you could say. One of the things, if you watch the video and you've watched the interview with TJ or Terry, he talks a little bit about Dave, I guess berating would be the right word, his crew.
Yes.
Did you experience that?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think Terry kind of implied that you had experienced some of those moments with him.
In point of fact, there were occasions of physical abuse that was not good, for sure. Like I said, I knew Dave to be very, very erratic. Like I said, I suspect that there was probably some undiagnosed bipolar mood disorder, and then add some institutionalized behaviors with the disassociation. That none of that is. Nothing would surprise me as far as erratic, irrational, aggressive behavior from Dave, because I definitely witnessed it in the time that I knew him.
So just to clarify, you said there was times of physical abuse. Are you meaning that he was physically abusive towards you?
Toward me and other people who would be on our truck with us. He definitely was. There was even an occasion where he was ready to fist fight somebody over nothing.
Wow.
Over just saying that it's because we were literally on a fire at this time, and what we were working on was a really hazardous piece of log that was on an overhang, and it was in a position to burn and roll down into the road and possibly cause a burst of embers that could make our lives harder on that division. So we were making an effort to get a crewman to climb up there and at least hit it with water so that it is less of an issue when it does roll down. And and that crew member actually, slipped and fell against a rock that like bruised his hip really, really badly. And he expressed that like I don't know if there is a safe way to get at this log, and over that Dave was willing to fist fight him.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, well, his hard hat came off, his pack came off, and he started shoving. Pushed this crew member up against the truck.
So he's definitely not against being
He's
physical.
definitely not against physical violence.
Okay. What do you think, or have you heard, or even have you been told what could have potentially happened with Ronie?
I heard. So this is the funny thing, again, kind of, some personal guilt on my part for, not giving more credence to some of the flippant, drug-fueled language from Dave. But there was an evening, and Jerry described this having occurred to me as that Dave had called him, and I recall also receiving a call from Dave in the very, very early hours of the night, and he was distraught. He was very, very upset, very escalated. Sounded like he had been crying.
What night was this? I'm sorry.
This was, I want to say it was about a week after Ronie had disappeared, but I wasn't aware at that particular time that she had disappeared.
Okay.
So my speculation is that Dave kind of went that week back and forth and adding some amphetamines into his system and whatever else. And then finally, I think maybe a certain level of guilt probably got at him, and he had to get it off his chest, because Jerry had described receiving a similar phone call in the very early hours of the morning. Dave being very upset and saying that he and Ronie had gone up the 8th Street extension to smoke. And the crying story that was told to me in this early hour of the night, and the same one that Jerry described to me, was that Ronie had pulled a gun on him, and that they fought over it, and that the gun went off and hit her in the face. For most of the community, that simply does not add up, because Ronie had never been comfortable with firearms. She preferred to keep some kind of a pocket knife on her person for personal defense. That was well known among kind of everybody that knew her, that the idea of firearms was really uncomfortable for her. So that really didn't scan. And also based on the information that the police report had in it, it also would not account for 2 bullets. And so, I dismissed it at the time as being, this is Dave being manic. He's probably had some amphetamines. Maybe he had a nightmare even, and between the lack of rest that he's probably getting with the amphetamines and whatever his own psychological hormonal balance is, like, this is maybe a fantasy. But looking back, I think it's probable that he took her up there to kill her. Probable, mind you.
Yeah.
Never anything. I've never heard any, actual hard investigative evidence that would point toward that. But I do know what I witnessed of his behavior in those months leading up, as far as changing phone numbers a lot, changing vehicles several times, and that adds up with amphetamine use too.
Mm-hmm.
But in particular, amphetamine use in association with the intent to do something nefarious, trying really hard to not be nailed down, and then to receive that phone call the week after she had disappeared, before I even knew she disappeared, and then I found out that she had disappeared, and those pieces kind of all clicked into that image in my head. But I don't really know for sure. I don't think really anybody has enough evidence to say for sure that is or isn't what happened. But I think it's probable.
Did Jerry ever talk to you about what he may have seen or experienced?
Jerry told me about having received a similar phone call from Dave, for one thing. He also told me about a dream he had. And this was, I want to say maybe 2-ish weeks, 2.5, almost 3 weeks. After Ronie's disappearance, and at that time I still wasn't aware that she had disappeared, but Jerry and I was at Jerry's house, probably trying to get my pay, and he described to me the phone call that he had received from Dave. That's really weird because he called me too, I think it was the same night that we had received a phone call, and it was really freaky. But then also Jerry described to me that weekend before he and I were sitting there in his house, that he had a dream that Ronie was just in his face and was calling his name, Jerry, and that it really disturbed him. And he said that he knew something bad had happened to her. That dream just gave him this inherent feeling that something bad had happened to her, which humans have a sixth sense. Mm-hmm. I think that is real. It's valid. But I also knew that at that time Jerry was also consuming narcotics. Jerry was a regular consumer of narcotics and also heavily medicated. So with Jerry, I could also dismiss it as being like, this could also be drug-fueled paranoia. But again, when I found out that Ronie had disappeared, those kind of things all clicked together into an image of probability.
Do you think there's a possibility that the two of them had something to do with her, not just Dave, but maybe...
I think it's possible, because I know that Ronie had a couple of different, transient periods where she was crashing on Jerry's couch too, so to speak. So I think it's possible, but I don't know. I don't have anything that would say hard whether that was or wasn't the case. But I also knew Jerry to, go through his phases where he deeply pitied Ronie and wanted to try to help her, and so he would let her stay, and he would make sure that she was eating and stuff. And then there were periods where he was deeply just annoyed with her very presence and the sound of her voice, where he would also be kind of this berating bully to Ronie about just kind of shut up, whatever, go away, leave me alone.
So, in thinking about Jerry, how reliable of a person, as far as when he's telling you stuff, how reliable of a person do you think he is?
Jerry's a flat-out liar on almost any number of things, both personally and professionally. The number of times that we had the entire crew coming to almost kick down his door trying to get our pay.
Wow.
Because of the risk that he might have already spent that money on something completely superfluous or useless or intangible, something that's not benefiting the business and definitely isn't benefiting any of the people that are working for him. I mean, there were so many times that we had the whole crew banging down his door just trying to get paid.
That's crazy.
And it was always a story. Just give me a couple of days. You get it. I'll have it next week for you.
That must have been exhausting.
Exhausting is only the beginning of it. So, I mean, just of all the things that would come out of Jerry's mouth, 99.9% of them you could not trust. I think one of the only very true things he ever said was to my husband in a very brief moment of lucidity. My husband had gone to Jerry's house to try to get my pay while I was out on a fire. We were desperately broke because we hadn't been paid for like 2 fires. That's about $8,000 worth of pay that a couple of 20-somethings really, really need to be able to continue to afford to live. So my husband described to me that he was there trying to get my pay in the middle of the night before I came home off the fire. He said that it was like a frightening moment of lucidity from Jerry. That Jerry's head came up and and he just told him that Jodi will be a better engine boss than Dave could ever hope to be. I think that might be one of the extremely few true things that Jerry ever said.
Well, I will tell you, just to let you know, like, and I'm sure you maybe saw it, I don't remember if I cut it out or not, TJ said you were really impressed him with your abilities. So, you know, I think that you're right. That was definitely something that people noticed.
Yeah.
So, it's just sad how the whole thing all kind of just went down.
House of Cards.
Yeah.
And it went down in flames, I think.
Yeah. Do you know anything about Dave's arrest?
I know that somebody had told me that he had been picked up, and I think I looked at the Ada County Sheriff's Office, and I saw that it was possession of a weapon, and that was kind of all the more that I knew about his arrest.
Did you know him to carry guns?
Absolutely.
Okay.
He would go through, this is more of the paranoid behavior, because as a felon, he knew he was not supposed to be in possession of firearms ever, according to the law. So I definitely knew him to go through phases where he would, collect a number of weapons, some of them, like class 3 firearms, that most average citizens can't even get a hold of. So how does a felon who doesn't even have his civil liberties get a hold of? Illegally, that's how. But I definitely knew him to go through phases where he would collect up a bunch of guns and his weird paranoia, and then, sometime in those moments of lucidity where you realize, like, this isn't healthy, I can't be doing this, and then he would, offload them, both out of realization that his behaviors were not healthy in that period, but also, I think, fear of getting busted with them and going back to prison, because no matter how institutionalized you get spending time in prison, you're still afraid to go back, even though it's the only place you really feel comfortable interacting with other human beings, because they're other human beings who have been classified by society like you, unfit to live with human beings. It's a terrible cycle.
Did you know Heather? Lopez. Did you know Jerry's kids at all?
I knew Logan, and I knew Gussie, Augustine, but I don't think I ever met the third child.
Vance.
Well, and Heather was married to Vance at some point, but she's also in prison, and so that's why we were wondering.
She's in prison specifically for dealing firearms to felons.
So we were trying to, see if.
Highly probable she might have been a source for Dave over the years, but I never met her. I never met Vance either.
Did Dave carry like a pistol?
I knew him to occasionally carry pistols on his person. The last one that I have a really clear memory was, I believe it was a 35 millimeter. Pretty good size handgun for sure. That's the last one I think I recall seeing, and it wouldn't surprise me for him, for him to seek out something smaller that's even more concealable for sure. Definitely knew him to have all kinds of different firearms and then have them and get rid of them.
Do you know anything about any bloody drop cloths that may have been found?
I heard that there was a house that Dave had been, because he did a lot of finishing and framing work. I heard that there was a house he had been working on, and I heard rumor through the community that some bloodied drop cloths had been found in that work site. At the time that work site, I think, was being condemned was the thing, was that he'd been working in there, and it was actually a house that the city intended to condemn anyway because it was just unlivable. So I think whoever he was working for had gone to gather up their things, and that was only hearsay that I heard. I didn't have anything direct enough to confirm that.
Okay. Do you remember what house that was, or?
I knew it was in the downtown area, and that was about all that I knew.
Okay. All right. Just one last question, just kind of circling back to Jerry again. But you feel like, he's somebody who lies a lot, would not, couldn't be trusted for true story on a lot of things, it sounds like. How much credit, if he were to say that he was actually there when it happened, how much credit would you put into that?
because I knew that Jerry and Ronie and Dave were definitely spending a fair amount of time together consuming narcotics, I'd put it pretty high percentage-wise possibility. Again, possibility versus probability. I don't have anything to point me at it being probable, but I'd definitely say that it was possible because I knew that they were spending a lot of time together consuming narcotics.
I ask that because we do know that he has. We do know for a fact that he has said he was there. He said he wasn't in the room. He was there. But you know, like I said, how much probability, how much likelihood, especially if like a week later he's telling people that he wasn't there, but it was I had this dream.
That it was,
you know,
remote,
it's kind of like
that he's removed.
He removes
Exactly.
himself a lot.
He removes himself a lot, and he always has. He definitely has. Even just on the pay issue. Like I said, you know, for the years that I knew Jerry, I knew him to be a liar. Like, it was, you know, stories about like, oh, my accountant, or I had to. It was always somebody else. It was, you know, I had to make a payment on the truck or whatever. It was always somebody else that he had to satisfy was why he didn't have that money to pay us. So I mean, absolutely, he was definitely fond of removing himself from any blame in situations.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you have any other questions?
I don't think I do. Do you have anything else you want to share?
No, I feel like that really gets kind of, you know, everything that I know and everything that I heard and everything that I observed in the behavior, and I hope that it does help, honestly, but that's kind of everything I think that I have.
Okay.
And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share it, you know.
And just to clarify, you have spoken with detectives, is that correct?
I did speak with the detective on
And
the
they know
case.
everything that you know, and
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows that, you know, this isn't like...
Yeah, I do know there's a new detective working on the scene, on the, and so
Someone who's making an effort to bring it out.
So
And that's kind of our goal. And I think we were talking earlier about why we picked this case. One of the things we both kind of noticed with this case is, there was that little bit in the news, but then it's just like you hear nothing. And I think that if people talk, maybe something will come out, or someone will finally speak up, or, you know, getting the right people to talk. And obviously a lot of the situations we've heard are very similar. A lot of the same characters, a lot of the same storylines.
well, that was an interesting interview with Jodi, and you know, I felt like we learned a lot again. You know, we're out here, Randy and
Misty,
and we're out here on the river. And why are we out here?
So we have heard a little bit about where Ronie was staying when she disappeared. We've heard a little bit about Kirk's house, so we've gone there. We've heard about her being along the river, and we knew about the Maverick, which isn't very far from here. So we just kind of picked a spot on the river and thought we would come down here because one of the last messages that Ronie actually sent, we actually have, and it says, well, Kirk had to go to jail and his house was overrun with shady people, so I have been sleeping in his garage. It only took 4 days to get the junkies away from here. I don't want anyone knowing where I am. As far as they know, I'm camping just on the outside of the river by Garden City.
So basically, this is what we know. And we also have other text messages from Ronie also, where she talks about that she was trying to avoid David and Jerry and some other people because she owed him money.
Right.
And that's why she was concerned for her safety.
Right.
That's why she was telling some people that she was living down by the river when she really wasn't. So.
And so we just picked this spot. It's a beautiful spot, but obviously at some point in time, Ronie was scared to let people know where she was.
Yeah.
So.
And we have heard that other people involved in the case may be living down by the river now too. You know, David, we would still love to talk with you. We know you have a side to the story, and we definitely want to hear your side. But speaking of, what did you think of that interview with Jodi?
Jodi had a lot to say, and I think she said a lot about his mental state. She seemed to be very aware of his possible, I don't know what you would call it, his paranoia.
Yeah, what she was saying, he seemed really paranoid.
But what does that mean for what happened? I don't know, because it can mean all kinds of things. People that are on drugs do things and they get paranoid, and who knows what was fueling what as far as Dave was concerned.
Yeah.
Jodi talks about hearing his guilt. That doesn't mean he killed her, though. It just means he had some sort of guilt over the whole situation. Obviously, this is somebody that Dave has had a long relationship with.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that you said that, brought that up, because about the drugs, because it was interesting how Jodi talked about how David was so high, he was convinced Ronie was going to try and kill him, and had hired people to try and kill him. Remember that story about the people running him off the road, that he was convinced Ronie hired to run him off the road with no evidence.
Right.
You know, drugs do weird things to people. I have a family member who one time when they were strung out was telling me that they were convinced that God had told them to build a boat and row the boat to England.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely, like, dead serious. Like, no, this is absolute fact. This is what God told me to do. So I've got to go to California and build a boat.
And it's sad because I think that, from what I understand, I think maybe Dave, not on drugs, had maybe a little tendency towards that. So I think that the drugs probably enhanced that paranoia.
Yeah.
Jodi talks about kind of the volatile relationship that the two of them apparently had. And I think that Dave, for whatever reason, had this fear Ronie was after her, but I think Ronie had a fear that Dave was also after her.
He's getting camera shy.
He is. So.
Yeah, and you know, the thing that I would, you know, add too is she said that without a doubt he called her up before she even realized that Ronie was missing, and said that he killed Ronie. That tells me, at the very least, he knows something.
Right.
That's why we want to talk to him, because I absolutely believe he knows something.
Right.
Whether he was the person who did it or not, I don't know. There's so much more still that we need to investigate and we need to find out.
And I think from Jodi and several others, they talk about the drugs getting run through the fire company. They talk about the fire truck that was confiscated. We've heard that several times, so we are pretty sure that that's an accurate thing, because it's not just one person's story. Jodi kind of talks about that as well, and she talks about Jerry's inability to pay them sometimes on time. So Jerry, obviously, with whatever he was going through, he wasn't a consistent figure either.
Yeah, he doesn't sound like he was a great business owner.
Right.
I'm not making judgments on what he may be now, but at least back then, it sounds like he was having a little difficulty running business. And from what we've heard from multiple people now, drugs were a big part of it.
And I know that that's everybody has their story. That doesn't mean Jerry killed her. That doesn't mean Dave killed her. It just means that they were people that keep coming up, and they're part of this story. And they clearly knew Ronie.
Yeah.
They were clearly close to Ronie, and Ronie took care of Jerry's wife. I mean, we know that they were close, and that's been confirmed.
Yeah.
So.
Without a doubt. And you know, I feel like we're getting closer to answers, but we still need evidence. We still need people to talk. So, you know, if there's anybody else out there that knows some information, you know, knows maybe where the gun ended up that killed her, you know, anything like that would be really, really important to find. And I know that that would be important for the police too.
Right.
So.
And the family needs closure. I even think in some ways, those that knew Ronie, that maybe weren't as close to Ronie, the closure would maybe help put some things to rest for them as well. Like Jodi, when she talks about Dave calling her and telling her all these stories, like, she maybe wasn't involved in the whole situation completely, but she was obviously close enough to Dave for Dave to reach out to her.
Yeah.
And so the fact that she was willing to speak with us, I appreciate that she came forward and that she was able to shed a little bit of light on Dave's mental state during that time.
Yeah. You know, in closing, I'll just, you know, we'll just reach out again. Look, if you know anything, any information, please talk to us. Look, if you need to stay anonymous, we can keep you anonymous. That's okay. But we really want to help the family. We want to help Tila. We want to help Maya. We want to help the other daughters. We want to help, you know, her friends. They need closure. You know, let's put this to rest. Look, if you know something, now's the time. It's been over 5 years. And the longer the case goes and stays cold, the less likely it will be that it will be solved. So it's gotta be now.
So if you know anything, if you want to share anything, or you know somebody that might know something, reach out to us. You can reach us at intodarknessnw@gmail.com.
Or on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/intodarknessnw. Please reach out to us, message us, contact us.
Yes.
You can talk to Misty, you can talk to me, you can talk to Inspector Duck. I mean, seriously, it'll be good. So we just want to help, and we want you to be able to help and get some things off your chest too. So let's make this cold case a closed case.